Poor widow endured unbearable humiliation for falling in love, but she returned as their queen. They spat at her feet, called her cursed, dragged her name through the dust for loving a boy with no name. But what they didn't know was that the boy they humiliated was born of blood they once feared. And the woman they tried to break would one day hold the power to make them all kneel. Before we begin the story, please leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The village of Eru was small, the kind where eyes speak louder than mouths and silence carries judgment farther than shouts. Near the edge of that village, in a cracked clay hut patched with leaves, lived Toby. Young, barefoot, no family, no name of value. He fixed roofs, carried water, and carved calabashes to eat. Just across the broken footpath lived Mara, the widow, a woman whom time, rumor, and grief had wrapped in superstition. Her two husbands dead, her silence misunderstood, her smile a rarity. The villagers called her cursed, but Toby saw her differently. Not as danger, but as something forgotten by love. He watched her from a distance, at the market, at her garden, by the firelight. Quiet glances became quiet visits. And one day her fingers brushed his hand and didn't pull away. That small touch, tender and unscripted, would set fire to the entire village. Because love, when born in the wrong hands, becomes something the world wants to punish. By morning, a gourd hung on her fence. On it, 3 words scrawled in ash and spit. Witch's dog love. The village had seen enough. And the Moon Festival was coming. They had plans for a public lesson. The Moon Festival arrived with drumming and dust. Children painted their faces in white chalk. Goats were slaughtered at sunrise and dancers prepared their masks. The village square brimmed with heat, smoke, and something else, anticipation. But not for the gods, not for the spirits, for something more wicked. They were waiting for the boy and the widow. She hadn't left her hut since the gourd incident. But he came, barefoot and bold, knocking gently as if nothing had changed. He brought her a cloth from the market, yellow and clean, the kind of gift a man gives a woman he wants the world to notice. You should wear it tonight, he told her, placing it on her step. Come with me. She didn't answer, not with words. But that evening, as drums echoed and fires lit up the path to the square, she emerged. Wrapped in yellow, hair tied back, eyes steady. They walked together like wind and flame, not touching but close enough that the air around them trembled. And the square fell silent. Then came the first laugh. It broke like glass, high and cruel, from the mouth of an elder's son. Another joined, then another, until the crowd became a storm. Someone tossed dirt at her feet. Someone else howled like a dog. The boy stood taller, jaw tight, refusing to flinch. She kills husbands, a voice shouted. She bathes in goat blood, another added. But it wasn't until the village chief stepped forward that the real cruelty began. He raised his staff and pointed at the boy. You want to shame your ancestors? He barked. Then let us shame you properly. From behind the crowd, they brought out a board. On it, crudely painted, chained dog of the widow witch. The boy stared. She reached for his hand, but they were pulled apart. Before either could speak, a bucket of slop water was flung. It hit her first. Then came the command, kneel, boy. Prove your love to the dirt you crave. The square howled. Even the children clapped. And he knelt, not for them, not for shame, but for her. He lowered his head, not in defeat, but defiance. And when the chief tried to force the board around his neck, the boy took it and held it up himself. But that night, something inside him cracked, because no one came to stop it. Not one neighbor, not one whisper of mercy. The drums kept beating, but now it sounded like war. By morning, he was gone. At dawn, the village was quiet. By noon, the boy was nowhere. His sleeping mat was cold, his tools gone. The garden beside the widow's hut had been trampled. No one saw him leave. No one claimed to care. But at her doorstep lay a gourd. It was split down the middle, carved with the same words once hurled in mockery. But this time beneath them was a single line etched in the wood with careful hands. Some things must break to reveal the core. The widow didn't weep. Not then. She held the broken gourd to her chest and stared toward the hills, where the mist swallowed the road. Her face was unreadable, like stone before the storm. The villagers assumed he'd run from shame. They laughed louder than before. But one child saw her that night, kneeling beside the cold fire pit, lips moving without sound. And in the silence, something in the air shifted, like the wind held its breath. By morning, she was gone too, and the stories that followed would bend with every tongue. Some said she walked into the forest to join the spirits. Others said she went mad, wandered off a cliff. But no one knew for sure. All that remained was smoke and silence. But not for long. The forest didn't welcome visitors. It breathed, it listened, it remembered. Especially the footsteps of those who came in sorrow. When the widow stepped beneath its branches, the trees did not part. They watched. She carried nothing but the broken gourd and the memory of a boy who knelt in the dirt for her. Days passed, or maybe just hours. Time bent in the forest. Paths twisted into themselves. Her feet bled. Her scarf, once black with grief, now clung to her shoulders like old regret. But she walked, and the forest watched, until finally she reached the place where no one dared go. The heart of the whispering bones. A clearing of white stones and broken idols, where spirits were said to whisper the truth no one wanted to hear. There she fell to her knees and laid down the gourd. "I have nothing," she said, voice hoarse. The wind stirred, and from the shadows came an old woman, eyes blind but unblinking. "You carry more than most," the crone rasped. "Pain sharp enough to split the sky, and love foolish enough to kneel in filth." The widow lowered her head. "What do you want?" The answer came without thinking. "To see him again." The crone nodded. "Then you must face your mirrors." Before she could ask, the ground shifted, and suddenly she was back in the village, but not quite. She saw herself as a child, silent beside her dying mother. She saw her first husband, kind and gentle, coughing blood in the night. She saw the second one, cruel, drunk, falling on his own blade as she screamed. It wasn't a curse, it was grief. Grief that no one ever stayed. Grief that stained her skin like a second shadow. She wept, not from fear, but from finally knowing that the story told about her was never hers to begin with. The forest softened, the air grew warm, and when she opened her eyes, the crone was gone. But the gourd was whole again. At that very moment, far beyond the tree, the king returned. The king didn't ride in with trumpets. He came at dusk, cloaked in dust and silence, seated atop a black horse with eyes like coal. Beside him were soldiers, not many but enough. Their armor bore no crest, but their posture told the village everything. This was no orphan boy anymore. He didn't speak as he entered, didn't look at the square where they'd laughed, or the spot where they'd made him kneel. He rode past it all like memory had been scorched from the earth, but he hadn't forgotten, not a second of it. The village froze, and then rumors caught fire. Some said he'd joined a rebel army. Others whispered he was the bastard of a fallen king, born in exile. No one knew. But the sight of him, taller, stronger, eyes cold and focused, shut every mouth. He didn't go to the widow's hut because it was no longer there. After her disappearance, the villagers had stripped the place bare. Her fire pit was gone. Her herbs burned. Children had played games around the ashes. But now no one dared step near it. The next day, the chief summoned a meeting of the elders. Their voices were low, fearful. "We must invite him," one said. "Welcome him back before he decides we're enemies." And so they did. They sent a feast, goats, yams, wine. They even carved a new gourd with the words, "Our lost son returns." He returned it unopened. 2 nights later, a boy was found tied to a post in the center square. The same boy who'd thrown the first bucket of slop. On his chest was painted, "Remember what you did." He wasn't dead, just broken, crying, silent. The message was clear. This king would not forget. From that night on, fear tightened its grip. The village moved differently, spoke less. Doors locked early. Laughter vanished. But they had no idea what was coming. Because far beyond the forest, in a temple long abandoned, a widow walked through fire. And she was coming home. The temple was older than memory. It sat buried in vines and silence, where even the spirits came barefoot. Its stone walls were cracked, its altars covered in moss. But the widow entered without fear. She had faced worse. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memory. Candles lit themselves as she passed, flickering like startled eyes. The gourd pulsed warm in her hand, not with magic, something deeper, as if it remembered its maker, as if it knew this was the place where her story would burn and be born again. She knelt before the altar, and the whispers began. They did not speak in words, but in visions. Smoke curled upward and formed faces, hers, younger, older, bent, proud. She watched herself hold dying husbands, bury broken dreams, and wear silence like a second skin. You believe their stories, a voice said, not cruel, not kind. But truth doesn't live in their mouths. Her hands trembled. I am not cursed, she whispered. No, the temple answered. You were chosen to bear witness, to endure, to rise. The flames rose, not to consume her, but to anoint her. And then they parted. A staircase appeared behind the altar, carved from black stone, spiraling down into the earth. She hesitated only once, then stepped inside. Down she walked, past walls lined with old names, forgotten queens, war widows, healer mothers erased by time. At the bottom, a single door pulsed with golden light. She touched it. It opened, and in the chamber beyond, a robe waited, not of royalty, not of shame, but of power, woven with threads the color of dusk and dawn. At its center, the emblem of the gourd. She put it on, and the room shifted. Above ground, the wind howled. The temple exhaled. Somewhere far away, the king's head turned toward the forest, eyes narrowing. He felt it. The village felt it. A pulse in the earth, like something buried, had awakened. And then, as if pulled by fate, he whispered to his captain, "Prepare the square. She's coming." They saw her before they understood. Just a shape at first, tall, wrapped in shadows and light, walking out of the forest with the patience of rain. The villagers froze where they stood. Chickens stopped scratching. Children fell silent mid-play. The widow had returned, but she wasn't the same. Her robe shimmered like dusk over water. Her steps made no sound. Her eyes held fire, not grief, and in her hand she carried the gourd, whole, glowing faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. She didn't speak as she passed the huts that once spat on her. She didn't look at the faces that had laughed, cursed, and turned away. She walked through them like wind through dry leaves, and they parted. By the time she reached the square, the king was already waiting. He stood on the raised platform in full ceremonial armor, not golden, but black, trimmed in red. Power radiated from him like heat. But when their eyes met, something softened. They hadn't seen each other since the night of the festival. No words were spoken. He simply stepped down and knelt before her. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Not out of mockery this time, but disbelief. Then slowly she raised the gourd. Not high, just enough. And the king stood. Together they faced the square. The soldiers banged their staffs once. The crowd stilled. The king's voice cut through the air. Tonight there will be judgment. 3 men were dragged forward, the chief, the elder's son, and the boy who'd thrown the first bucket of slop. They trembled. The chief tried to speak. "We didn't know." "You didn't care," the king replied. The widow said nothing. She simply looked at them, and that was enough. The king turned to his guards. "Chain them for the next phase." The crowd gasped. What phase? What was coming? The widow's eyes narrowed, not in hatred, but in memory. She remembered the taste of dirt. She remembered the laughter, and she was not done. The square had never been this full, not even during the harvest feasts or ancestral blessings. Tonight, no one brought drums or lanterns. They brought fear. Some came barefoot, some trembling. All came because they had no choice. The king stood at the center, tall, unyielding. Beside him, the widow robed in dusk and dawn, face veiled in firelight. In front of them knelt 3 men in chains, the village chief, the elder's son, and the bucket boy, his face still bruised, lips cracked. Behind them, guards stood with spears angled low, ready. The king raised one hand. Silence. "You knew," he said, voice calm. "You saw me kneel in filth for love. You saw a woman mocked for surviving death, and you chose laughter." The chief tried to protest, but his voice cracked under the weight of hundreds of eyes. "You said she was cursed," the king continued. "You told your sons to spit at her doorstep. You burned her roof. You exiled a woman who saved your children from fire, while you stood and watched." Whispers ran through the crowd. Shame slithered from face to face. Then came the gourd. The widow stepped forward, holding it high. It glowed softly, humming like breath. "She carried this when you broke her spirit," the king said. "Now it will carry your sentence." He pointed to the chief. 30 lashes, publicly. At dawn to the elder's son. Banishment for a full cycle of the moon. You will live outside the gates, fed by none. And finally to the boy who had thrown the bucket, "You will serve in the palace of ashes, cleaning the graves of those who died while you laughed." Gasps, even sobs. The widow didn't smile, but neither did she stop it, because justice wasn't kindness, it was clarity. Then the king turned to the crowd. "But punishment is only part of healing." He gestured to a new structure, draped in cloth. With one swift pull, the veil fell. It was a shrine, small, simple, but unmistakable. At its center, the widow's image, carved into blackwood, standing tall, unbroken. "A monument to the woman you tried to erase," the king said, "so your children will never forget." Then with deliberate steps, he walked to the chief, still on his knees, and removed the man's headdress. "From this day forward," the king declared, "there will be no council unless she sits at its center." Another gasp. This one came with tears. Not from pain, from reckoning. Because in that moment, power shifted, not through fire or war, but through memory made permanent. As guards began escorting the sentenced men away, one villager dropped to his knees, then another, then more. No one ordered them. They just knelt. Not for the king, but for her. And still she didn't speak. Her silence had become scripture. Later that night, in the privacy of the palace chamber, the king removed his armor and knelt once more before her. "Will you walk beside me?" he asked. She didn't answer right away, but she touched his face, and that was enough. The moon rose over the village like a witness. The winds quieted. But the drums, those ancient drums, would return the next day, this time for a wedding no one ever expected. The drums returned at dawn, not the frantic pounding of fear or war, but the slow, steady rhythm of beginnings, a new sound, a new day. The villagers emerged from their homes barefoot, heads bowed, unsure whether they were allowed to smile yet. The square had changed overnight. Banners of deep gold and midnight blue danced in the breeze. The shrine to the widow stood at the center, now surrounded by flower garlands and small clay offerings left by children. No one told them to do it. They just did. The throne platform remained, but this time there were two thrones, and beside them, a long path had been painted across the square in crushed rose petals and river chalk. The path that would carry the woman they once cursed into history. She appeared without fanfare, still robed in twilight colors, still silent. But her presence carried weight, like a hymn walking. The crowd parted, not out of fear, but reverence. When she stepped onto the path, a wind stirred. And when she reached the thrones, the king stood. He did not crown her with gold. He placed upon her head a circlet woven from the forest vines, the same vines that had once hidden her from the world. Now they lifted her into it. Then he spoke. "Let no one here forget what shame looks like and what grace feels like. You called her cursed. I call her queen." Tears fell, unashamed, grateful, human. The ceremony was simple. No parade, no fireworks, just truth, and two people who had walked through ruin to meet again on even ground. They sat side by side, and slowly the villagers began to clap, not out of duty, but release. The laughter that followed was different now, softer, cleansing. Old women sang songs they hadn't dared hum in years. Young boys touched the edge of the shrine, whispering apologies they didn't yet know how to form. And in that square, surrounded by the ghosts of what once was, a new village was born. As night fell, the stars blinked open like old eyes. A soft breeze swept through, carrying the scent of yam stew, fresh rain, and forgiveness. In the palace garden, the king and his queen sat quietly. He turned to her. "Was it worth it?" he asked. She looked out over the flickering torches, the families reuniting, the fear turned into music. And finally, she smiled. But deep in the forest, under the roots of an old tree, the cracked version of the gourd still lay buried, not forgotten, just resting, because even healed things remember how they broke. The days that followed felt different. The village no longer whispered. They listened. Children played near the shrine without fear. Elders, once loud with warnings and superstition, now spoke softly, weighing their words before sharing them. The air felt lighter, like something poisonous had finally been exhaled. The king and his queen did not rule with noise, they ruled with presence. She spent her mornings walking through the village, not above them, but among them. Her hands touched herbs, soothed crying babies, and blessed the sick. Some villagers cried the first time she smiled at them, not out of guilt, but relief. Because forgiveness, when earned, feels like a gift no one deserves. The king focused on rebuilding. He tore down the broken council hall and replaced it with a community garden, open to all. The square became a place of story circles, not punishments, but some memories never left. At the edge of the village, the shrine remained. Every week, someone new came to place a flower, a poem, or a carved token. It wasn't a ritual, it was gratitude. And under the old tree, the cracked gourd still rested, covered now in soft moss, kissed by rain. Not buried in shame, but kept as proof that from broken things, whole futures can grow. One evening, as the sky turned violet, the king and queen sat by the fire. No titles, no guards. Just two souls once cast aside, now chosen, by each other and by time. The queen looked toward the village, its homes lit with warmth and song. And in a whisper barely heard by the wind, she said, "Let them remember everything." And they did. So, what would you have done if you were the one they laughed at, if you were the one forced to kneel, if you were the one they called cursed and then crowned? Would you have forgiven, or would you have made them remember? These are the kinds of stories that live inside villages and bloodlines, but also inside us. Stories of dignity, love, shame, justice, and quiet redemption. So tell me in the comments, what moment hit you the hardest? Was it the kneeling in the square, the shrine unveiled, or that final, silent smile? And if you were rating this story from 1 to 10, honestly, what would you give it? Your feedback helps shape what comes next. So before you go, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Every like, every sub, every shared comment helps keep stories like this alive. It keeps the old voices speaking and the new ones listening. Thanks for spending your time here. We'll meet again in another tale, beneath another sky.